So this is the card issued by the state. As you can see, I'm a non-growing patient. So that means that I can't grow for myself, but I do have a caregiver. And the caregiver visited me the other day, and God bless America. I have lived to see this day. I have lived to see this day. Thank God, free at last. Oh, free at last.
When I was very young, I was drawn to healing arts and medicine, and over time I became more interested in botanicals. Late in high school and early in college, I became aware of the medical uses of marijuana, along with the industrial uses and hemp seed as nutrition, and started to become aware of the hypocrisy around this plant being illegal when it has so much to offer our species. At that time, I became a medical marijuana advocate. I linked up with a activist group at Indiana University and started to do more with educating the public on the safety and various uses of marijuana. Later on, when I was in medical school, I actually became more interested in the scientific research around it and started to be really blown away by what I was finding. I think any scientist that hears about one substance that can purportedly cure or help with so many different conditions has to be suspicious of it. And at that time, my second year in medical school, and I started looking deeper into the research, it just kept coming. There was a huge body of evidence already, and there was more coming out all the time, that yes, this one medicine can really do all that people claim it can. It seems to be the most useful single remedy for the most people, for the most conditions.
I first read about it for him out of MS magazine that he gets for his multiple sclerosis, and it's supposed to help spasticity in MS. And that's where we've read a lot in the papers, about the medical marijuana in other states. I've read a lot online about medical marijuana and the benefits of pain so that he could take less narcotics. So we decided to try the marijuana.
In my fourth year of medical school, I had the opportunity to do a rotation with a medical marijuana and endocannabinoid system researcher, John McPartland, another osteopath in Vermont. And that opened my eyes and mind even more to the system of physiology, the endocannabinoid system, that is an explanation of healing in people and in animals, something that was generally left out of medical school. Your body is always, and has always been since you were a tiny little ball of cells in the womb, been producing and responding to substances that are like those found in cannabis. At least they act the same way. Molecularly, they look different, but they have similar functions. And in our bodies right now, we have receptors to these compounds throughout our entire system, our nervous system, our gut and digestive tract, the connective tissues, muscles, fascia, fat cells, immune cells, glands, organs, testes, reproductive organs. This is one system that permeates and crosses all these different boundaries in the body, and to me is one explanation of the mind-body connection. When we see the same substances active in the brain and in the muscles and in the organs and in the reproductive organs, it's this system of communication, of holism and balance.
I have moderate to severe degenerative disc disease throughout my whole spine, from basically the base of my skull to the tip of my tailbone, and it gets worse in various areas. I'm going to say the severe is probably 2/3 of it, and the moderate is the last 1/3 that hasn't been affected that badly yet.
I first heard of medical marijuana several years ago from a friend of mine. He recommended it for some of the pains and symptoms that I had, neurological symptoms that I have.
I use medical marijuana because I have serious nerve damage from having spinal cord surgery in 2008.
I use medical marijuana for many different reasons. The biggest one, the reason why I get it prescribed to me is because I have hepatitis C. Because of using cannabis, my viral load is, basically down to zero. It's completely inactive in my system. I carry the antibody for it, and I contribute this a lot to cannabis.
I learned that marijuana has benefits for me medically years ago when I injured my back.
Back in 1988, I fell through a ceiling and I stretched out, tore out most of the ligaments on the left side of my back. And after you're 40 years old, they just don't gain that elasticity back. And so I developed a bend in my spine and all kinds of problems there, which I had to correct with, corrective footwear and, exercises and so on. And I discovered that the marijuana, while it didn't take the pain away, it reduced it. And after a while, I began to ignore the pain.
I'm making the choices that I think are best for my patients and treating them with substances that are safe and therapies that are natural whenever possible. So medical marijuana is just a natural choice for so many people that I see. Now, because I'm making that choice and there's all this controversy and legal issues around it, it just has drawn me into the activism world.
This is our first Patient Choice Awards presentation. Bonnie is our first recipient. Bonnie Frank, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. I have to tell you where I think the public falls prey to misinformation and doesn't always have immediately the right information which to make decision. On the other hand, let me say, with regard to medical marijuana, to marijuana in general, the voters are clearly ahead of the politicians. There's a serious case of cultural lag among members of state legislatures and Congress, and they still have this fear of being branded as, quote, soft on drugs, unquote, although we're not sure what that means. And I think this is a case where common sense is going to win out. If everybody who agrees with us that this war on marijuana is counterproductive and foolish and expensive and an intrusion on adults' right to make choices, if everybody simply registered that opinion with the elected officials, we could clean up the laws.
When I first started my private practice after coming out of my residency training, I was operating under the Maine 1999 law, which had a more limited scope of conditions, and all that was required for a patient's certification was my signature on a piece of paper. After a few months, that law changed, and the state started requiring patients to register in order to get an ID card that would give them legal protection to use medical marijuana. That transition happened a little bumpy for a lot of patients.
In my quest for finding a doctor, I found out about Dr. Sulak and went to him. At the time, I could barely even move. I mean, I was just hobbling around his office, and he put me up on the table and he gave me a treatment and asked me if I'd ever, thought about using medicinal marijuana. And I said, that's a funny thing there, Dr. Sulak. Yeah, I'm glad you kind of asked me that. Yeah, I have. And he said, okay, here, I'll give you your recommendation. I definitely feel that you can benefit from it. And I thank God for Dr. Sulak.
Well, I was thrown out of one clinic, one doctor's office, because I had a severe anxiety attack while I was there. And it had to do with medical marijuana. He threatened to call the police 4 times. Of all the people, the police officer was the most reasonable person to deal with.
So here's a partial list of health conditions that marijuana can help. And I'm actually going to go through some of this. I know it's right out in front of you. Attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity disorder. ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. It's a neurodegenerative disease. Alzheimer's, anorexia, anxiety, asthma, ataxia, which is a problem with movement and walking.
Ataxia is the reason why I use marijuana, which is also called spinal cerebellar degeneration, or Friedreich's ataxia. A lot has to do with MS, which this has it kind of sounds like kind of similar to MS, kind of similar to spinal bifida, kind of similar to cystic fibrosis, similar to quite a few nerve diseases. What the issue is that we are prone to severe muscle spasms, and that's why I started. Since then, I haven't had any. Since I've been legal for the last, for the last year, but since I've been smoking, I haven't had a muscle spasm at all.
Bipolar disease, cachexia, which is wasting syndrome from not being able to eat or maintain nutritional status.
My oncologist, who has recommended it to me, is mainly concerned with the appetite, something they call cachexia. I am really a fairly lightly built person, and though it's often a matter of humor, I really need to eat quite a bit to maintain my weight. The cancer has somewhat of a wasting effect. Also, the hormone blockers that I'm taking have a wasting effect, and it's really a daily struggle for me to keep, my weight up.
Cancer, chronic fatigue, chronic pain.
I use medical marijuana for pain, for spasm, for fatigue issues, to reduce spasms, to reduce pain, primarily. I have cerebral palsy, so I have it primarily to relieve the symptoms and secondary effects of cerebral palsy.
Cramps, whether they're abdominal or menstrual, Crohn's disease, diabetes, depression, epilepsy, fever, fibromyalgia, glaucoma, hepatitis, an infection of the liver, HIV and AIDS, incontinence, insomnia, migraine headache, MRSA, which is a methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. It's a bacteria that is resistant to some of our strongest antibiotics. Marijuana, or cannabinoids, the compounds found in marijuana, can kill it. Multiple sclerosis.
And they use Versed on me. You're not really a good thing to use on somebody with multiple sclerosis and rheumatoid arthritis and 2 blown knees. And marijuana, cannabis. You always can't forget. Your cannabis, yes, is always good. It's not a bad drug, cannabis. The drug companies want you to think it's a bad drug, but it's not.
Nausea, neuralgia, neuropathy, Parkinson's, PMS, post-traumatic stress disorder.
I used to be addicted to many different substances, and I use cannabis along with the 12 steps and the higher power to help me stay clean. It's been almost 3 years now.
Rheumatoid arthritis, sickle cell anemia, spasms.
Muscle spasms can be on an hourly basis if I don't smoke. Since I do smoke, I don't even have to take the Flexeril that they prescribed to me. And the doctor gave me a 30-day supply. I think it was 4 months ago, and I still have all but 3 of them. I've only taken 3 out of the bottle. And I only reserve that to take them if I have a situation to where I can't get out of bed at all.
This is going to be our new grow room. In compliance with Maine state law, is a 10 by 10 room. My husband, who is handicapped, of course we have outlets in every corner to make it easily accessible to him. We will be putting up handrails around the perimeter also for him. And right smack dab in the middle is where our grow light's going to go. Right here, plants, probably a few tomatoes and vegetables and some marijuana. There are 6 plants here. 3 are bud-in. 3 we just brought in to start bud-in so that we can stagger them. We're hoping once we get into the new room where we know what we're doing more, make sure we have spider mites under control, and we'll get some good quality medical cannabis.
I had a lot of patients that were very hesitant to register with the state, even though they knew that come January 1st of 2011, their medical marijuana use would become illegal, even though they had the handwritten paper with my recommendation on it. So there's naturally, in people that have been persecuted for using a plant that helps them, there's got to be some distrust of their government. And when all of a sudden the government goes from saying, no, this is illegal, to saying, yeah, come on, send me all your information and let me know that you're doing this thing that's illegal, people are hesitant.
My name's Alicia Melnick. I'm the Public Policy Counsel for the Maine Civil Liberties Union. That's the Maine affiliate of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. We've been involved in the medical marijuana issue for at least a year and a half. We know what our concerns are. Our top concerns are patient privacy and confidentiality.
My name is John Thiel. I'm the program manager for the medical use of marijuana program in Maine, and I've been there for a couple of months. And I came down today because I liked what the gentleman who opened the meeting had to say about discussing a social narrative. And I think, hopefully we're going to be working together for a while. And I think part of the reason that communication is so helpful is because we come to understand each other. Assuming that when these laws are written so ambiguously that they're doing it for a reason. And I think, things will evolve. But I realize that we're working in the real world now, and you want to make sure you're not breaking the law. The state of Maine is interested in seeing a dispensary system develop. And I think they see this as a way of not helping, but of making sure that the dispensary system does get a chance to develop. A caregiver came into my office because somebody had stolen his plants. And then they had gotten busted, and they told the police where they had gotten the plants. So the police went to the caregiver's place. And this is like highlighting why you should be very careful where you grow your plants. Our relationship with the police as of January 1st will be, and this will be it, we will have a 24-hour phone line that they call, and they give the ID number on the card, and they will be able to find out if that card is active or if it has been canceled. That's it.
I have a follow-up.
Yep.
To that. John, so okay, let's say my local small town guy pulls me over. I whip out my card, I give it to him. Now my small town police officer, who has a big mouth, knows that I'm a patient. And I will guarantee that everybody in our town will know within 24 hours.
The legislation provides for civil action against anyone who violates confidentiality with up to a $1,000 fine.
Okay.
If law enforcement is showing up at your door, I would say that they're going to do whatever they want to do, irregardless of what the Health and Human Services said, or maybe not, maybe their intent, but it would be law enforcement that's making that decision.
As of January, what's going to change is that people are going to be required to be registered to avoid prosecution and conviction. That's the big thing that's going to change, is, again, this removal of the affirmative defense.
Let's say I'm a caregiver and I'm producing the maximum yield that I can, but I'm within state regulations. like you said, the law enforcement is going to do what they're going to do. The FBI kicks my door in. They take everything. I'm on TV. I'm in the news. But I've maintained complete compliance under the state regulations. Where now, are you going to go to bat for me in federal court?
That's what we want to know. Period.
Because that's the only reason to get the card.
Exactly.
I'm serious. I mean, everybody's dancing around that question here, but the real question is, where does Maine stand?
And well, you know, you don't want me just to answer that because I might be going the day after tomorrow. You want to know what Human Services is going to do.
You know, we're really concerned about the affirmative defense piece of the law. You know, I think there's a couple ways to go. There's a voluntary registry, or there's the affirmative defense. We're just exploring those different options right now and seeing what the landscape would be. You know, obviously there's been a big shift in the state after November 3rd, and there's just a lot of unknowns right now.
In general, I think the registration with the state is more of a concern around patients' privacy, and that's the biggest area of resistance. Yes, they're doing a good job now. Seems like they're keeping information private. Seems like the governor and the current administration is supportive of this program. What happens when that changes? And all of a sudden there's a database sitting on somebody's computer with 2,000 names of medical marijuana patients that could easily be turned over to the federal government if they decide they want to go after these people. So, like I said, there's a healthy distrust of the government's involvement in medical marijuana for a good reason.
Medical marijuana's replaced all of my prescription meds. The last stuff that I was taking was I was taking max dose of Neurontin, 1,200 milligrams 3 times a day. Not for seizures, but a neurological disorder that I have called syringomyelia. It was able actually to work with the neurons in my head and lessen some of the neurological pains, or phantom pains, and things. So another one that I was taking was Scalaxin. That was max dose 3 times a day, 800 milligrams. Tramadol, 100 milligrams 4 times a day. That was max dose. Flomax, and also Viagra because of all the side effects from the other stuff. But I'd also in the past been on OxyContin, methadone, Vicodin, you name it. We tried everything and worked with a medical rehabilitation place. They dealt with pains and meds, and they actually ran out of options for me. And a friend of mine suggested the medical marijuana. And from that point, it's gone well.
I read Dr. Weil's book, Spontaneous Healing, when I was 17 years old, and that really opened my mind to health and healing and curiosity around how to stimulate it and how to observe it properly. I then looked at some of his earlier work, and I was surprised to find that his first work was on marijuana, actually, and other altered states of consciousness. I had the good fortune of getting to know Dr. Weil during medical school, and having some wonderful conversations with him around why he believes humans have a natural tendency to seek out altered states of consciousness, and the health benefits of altered states of consciousness, and how they can be used directly to promote health, and also what's lacking in our current society in terms of wisdom being passed on through the generations around this.
If something primarily affects you, then it's none of the government's business. If what you do affects other people, then obviously there needs to be sensible regulation, although not excessive. And that's a fundamental principle. The prisons and the courts and everything else are filled with people guilty of enjoying a smoke.
Medical marijuana and marijuana legalization are two separate discussions, but both have their academic components that we can look at objectively and make good decisions on. We know that marijuana is a good medicine, and that's been proven scientifically, clinically. That's what applies to my current practice as a physician. I think about medical marijuana. Is it a good treatment option for my patients? That's separate from my belief and understanding that prohibition simply doesn't work, and it never has. In this country, we've already experienced prohibition of alcohol, which was repealed. We looked at prohibition of marijuana and other substances over the last several decades, which has been totally ineffective. It basically creates a black market which supports the irresponsible use of these substances and does nothing to decrease the amount of use, but actually increases the riskiness, the risk behavior in that use. It disconnects people from any tradition of passing down knowledge on how to use these substances appropriately, and it also leads people into other illegal activities that are also in the black market. So regulation and legalization of marijuana from a scientist or an academic perspective is a clear choice. There's really no evidence that supports the way we currently handle it in this country, and there's quite a bit of history that disputes it.
Good morning, and thank you for being here. My name is Diane Russell. I represent Mundray Hill in downtown Portland in the Maine House of Representatives. Thank you for being here. As a lawmaker, I have a responsibility to see and deal with the world as it is and judge public policy on evidence-based analysis. It is with this in mind that today I stand with supporters to kick off the Maine First campaign and formally release LD 1453, an act to legalize and tax marijuana. First and foremost, LD 1453 changes the paradigm of how we look at drug policy. It is time to see these policies through the lens of public health and not through the lens of the criminal justice system. It is time to start treating addiction as a mental health issue and not a criminal justice issue. Painkillers are the drugs killing Maine people. So why are we spending an estimated $26 million per year in Maine to root out, prosecute, and jail people for the possession and sale of marijuana?
4.5 years ago, we created the Maine Marijuana Policy Initiative to essentially try to address the question of marijuana prohibition here in the state of Maine. And over the last 4.5 years, we've had some success moving forward on the question of medical marijuana, making sure medical marijuana patients have their medicine, have full access to their medicine with Question 5. And most recently, we were able to create a trade association that now represents over 150 people who are caregivers, licensed caregivers in the state, who produce medical marijuana for qualified patients. To see this next step actually come into fruition, and to see an elected official who has enough guts and integrity to stand up and tell you what other elected officials say when they're off camera makes us pretty happy.
I'm here today because over-incarceration is one of the great civil rights struggles of our time. Maine needs to use its resources wisely, and locking people up, and spending money and energy on people who use marijuana is not sensible, and it is not sustainable. The United States incarcerates more of its citizens, by far, than any other country in the world. Though we make up 5% of the world's population, the United States is responsible for nearly 25% of the world's prisoners. And nearly 500,000 people are behind bars in this country because of drug charges.
You know, we have a huge budget crisis. Huge budget crisis, and we have a market that is already existing. We keep talking about, you know, how do we create jobs and how do we bring money to the state? Well, maybe let's just take a market that already exists and make it legal.
in the long run, we need to take a hard look at our drug enforcement strategies here in this country. That we need to have something that's more rational, that makes sense, that recognizes what a real threat is to the community and what is not a threat. And those are not easy conversations to have. I mean, 10 years ago, part of talking about medical marijuana was to declare that it wasn't going to be some sort of camouflage to legalize it, that we were talking about the patient and not about recreation. But at the same time, having been a sheriff for 12 years, I've seen a lot of people suffer the label of being a criminal for engaging in what was not necessarily a threat to the public safety.
Honest, hardworking people, consume marijuana responsibly. That hardworking, honest, law-abiding citizens would like to see the revenue that comes in from this. The bill that I am introducing will tax it at a straight 7%, very much like if you walk in and order a cocktail at the bar down here, you're going to get charged 7%. It's the same thing. It's a sales tax.
As a citizen, you should not be persecuted for wanting to use marijuana. It's a plant. It's a natural substance. But as a patient, I mean, you're not just someone who wants to use it. You need to use it. And to persecute you for that is just unacceptable.
I grow my own medicine. I have a greenhouse that I grow food in, I grow fish, I grow my medicine, I grow some other patients' medicine for them. It's pretty rewarding to know that I can take care of myself.
We've had pretty good success with people registering since that time, though. I think the more people that have, they're realizing that it's generally a safe thing to do, at least for the patients. I've had very few patients that have had any direct interaction or hassling by law enforcement or state officials as a result of their registration. Caregivers are a little bit of a different story. I've heard more stories about caregivers registering to help 5 or less patients, and when they do register, the state might show up at their house and give them a little bit of hassling or search their grow room, etc. For the most part, I think that that's been pretty mild also.
Recently we did have a drug raid on our home. It was November 16th. It was 2 days after we had Dish Network satellite installed at our house. I've done a lot of research, and I'm discovering that what I believed happened is because of the Veterans Administration, and my husband has been blacklisted up there as a marijuana abuser regardless of their knowledge of his medical marijuana use. These fusion centers that they have in all the states now collect data on everybody, and I believe the federal VA probably put that information at the fusion center. We ordered Dish Network, and instead of having a regular Dish Network technician sent into our house, they sent in a National Guard undercover cop wannabe or whatever he is. I haven't actually identified who these 2 men were that came to my house because everybody's hush-hush about it. But they lied in an affidavit in order to get a search warrant from the court, and they lied completely in the affidavit. They snooped in my house. Make a long story short, we had a raid on our house. They busted in our doors. They did not have the search warrant when they first came in. They produced it 20 minutes later. Says that's the search warrant. Knew my husband was a medical marijuana patient. Still proceeded to search the house. Another issue I had with that is the fact that my husband is disabled and needed my assistance. And I asked to go to his aid to help him, and they refused to allow me to assist my husband.
Back in October, I had a visit from the Maine DEA and a warden and a couple of state troopers, and there was some yelling and handcuffing and displaying of knives and guns and scary cop behavior in my house, in my greenhouse, because I was following the law.
Would they have shot him? That part bothers me. He could have grabbed a gun and go out back to go see why someone's on our property. What's our dog barking at? So they set up a potentially lethal situation? Based on what?
Seems that the MDEA received an anonymous letter stating that I was growing marijuana and selling other illicit drugs from the property in large quantities. an anonymous tip to the hotline that just had my name, address, and marijuana. And a concerned citizen and the fact that they sent a warden onto my property in the middle of the night to find marijuana stalks in my compost bin, where I place my marijuana stalks so I can compost them, to get the warrant to then invade my property to find out that, as it says in the affidavit, that I have a legal business there, growing produce. So the state of Maine invades a legal business that grows produce, accusing him of selling mass quantities of marijuana, when in fact, for the 6 months that they watched me, I was a legal grower for patients, and I had made no secret of it.
Okay, my camera's on. March 19th, 2010, we're going to be doing a drug search warrant at the James Fowler residence on 8th Street in Pittsfield. Just tell us where we're going to be after. How you doing? Okay. Lieutenant Guiterdi from the Sheriff's Department. We have a drug search warrant for your residence for obvious reasons. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anybody here with you? No.
Now, Maine's a different situation. When I came to Maine, I got legal here, found my patients, and started growing for them. Decided to post my legal pictures of my legal plants online on my Facebook account. Right up there beside a copy of my script, signed by Dr. Dustin Sulak, with several other pictures, and a cop in Central Florida, 2,500 miles from here, saw my pictures come across one of our common friend's Facebook page and decided to take it on himself to investigate me. Didn't care that I wasn't in his state, didn't care that I might be legal. In fact, I'm sure if he looked at everything, he must have saw the picture of my script. How can you avoid seeing that? Well, he turned around and took it on his own to let his fingers do the ratting, and he called the Sheriff's Department up here and told them that they had a Facebook internet marijuana cultivator. And that's how they proceeded. Didn't care that I was possibly legal or medical, or just basically proceeded as if I were a criminal.
I don't have any legal concerns about my practice. I have spoken with lawyers and the Maine Medical Association. I have their support. I'm working closely with DHHS. And as far as I know, I'm practicing good medicine. 2001 federal case, Conan versus Walters, defended a physician's ability to recommend anything to a patient, even if it was off-label or a controlled substance. And that's just a recommendation. Now, I can't help a patient acquire marijuana in any way. If I did, that would be stepping over a line, and I would have legal concerns there. But I can recommend that a patient brush their teeth. I can recommend that a patient use marijuana. These are just suggestions that I find helpful. We also do informed consent here, and a patient signs off on the legal aspects of the fact that I'm recommending a substance that isn't regulated, that's a botanical with not a guaranteed potency or a guaranteed quality. So I feel pretty safe about that. It would be nice if there could be more of a direct way of helping patients connect with legal and reputable sources of cannabis. For example, I have no problem referring a patient to a therapist or to a specialist, but I can't refer a patient to a dispensary or a caregiver.
The notion that we penalize people or prevent medical marijuana is just nuts. If you were going to make a list of the medications that are given to people who are ill, marijuana would be pretty low down on the list of potency. It is not mind-altering in anything like that degree. It's not habit-forming.
Actually, while I was going through the withdrawals from all of the medication, now this wasn't something I didn't start smoking and just stop taking all my medications. It was something that took a while. Worked my medication doses down, and then was able to remove them totally from my life, and actually participate in life again.
Overall, medical marijuana has far less side effects. I don't have to worry about breathing. I don't have to worry about, like, getting really bad panic attacks or, like, having to take opiates and then take anti-anxiety meds because the opiates would trigger panic attacks. So, certainly it's not a panacea, and certainly I find that, like, with some of my antispasms, it's really good to take less of my antispasm and smoke, because it seems to work in conjunction better than either one or the other, but as a combination, it seems more effective.
A roommate that we had contracted to come live in an extra bedroom, a student at the University of Colorado there, and he was paying, turned out to be an informant. And after attempting to get me to shoot morphine, which is what he did, you know, he said, try this, Dave, and attempting to talk me into smuggling large amounts of not only marijuana but cocaine across the Mexican border, all of which I refused to do. After attempting those things on me, he turned me in for money. I think it was $500. And that was something that, again, led very much to the first divorce back in those days. Because, again, in those days there was no sense that that someone who smoked marijuana was anything but a drug fiend, a dope fiend, you know, a criminal.
And this is the problem that I had with Jay. He said, you know, anybody who wants it can get it now, and it's better that way because it's not encouraged. Well, yeah, that means if you are a wealthy white guy, you're okay smoking marijuana. But if you're a teenager, particularly if you're black, but if you're white and you live in a poor neighborhood, you may find yourself arrested and prosecuted for it. And it's simply this notion, well, we'll keep it illegal. Because one of the things I hear from people is, look, we don't really like people to do it. So let's discourage it by keeping it illegal, but not enforcing the law much. That's awful. That's the worst of all worlds. What a bad way to try and give people respect for the law. That's instilling hypocrisy into young people.
As far as my family goes, most of them are staunch Republicans. And we know how that goes. Some of them are, you know, I mean, I have my family members that understand why I do what I do, and yeah, they smoke too. They medicate themselves in the states that they respectively live in. But then I do have that staunch Republican other half that look down their noses at what I do very much.
Brian's mother is very supportive. She has MS too, but she's reluctant to try it because of the illegality of it. She has more advanced MS than Brian does, and I would really like her to try it, so I'm going to try and get her to try either an edible or possibly the oil, because I think it would benefit her. She has burning in her feet and her legs all the time. She said that she feels like her feet are always on fire. And none of her MS medication helps that. And she's read a lot on it, so she's definitely supportive. She understands medically what is out there, the information that it can help her, but she's still reluctant. She's also 70-something years old. So
there are three types of human activities from the standpoint of the government. There are activities that are harmful to other people, and we make them illegal. You can't hit somebody. You can't steal their money. You shouldn't be able to promote, to produce products in ways that destroy the air and impinge on other people's health. You shouldn't be able to sell products that are defective. So yeah, there are things that we prevent you from doing because they will hurt other people. Then there are a few things that we encourage. We should be encouraging exercise. We should be encouraging people to eat healthy. But from the standpoint of the government, the great majority of human activity ought to be things that we ignore. that we don't tell people not to do it, and we don't tell people to do it. That's what freedom means. Freedom means that adults have a right to make the choices.
As with all people, I went through that period of discovery with drugs, freedom with drugs. So yes, you go through marijuana, and then eventually somebody says something about speed, or mushrooms, or cocaine, or something like that. So I did all of those. Speed I did once, and I thought, oh my dear God, this is horrible shit. Jesus, why would anyone do this? And then I did cocaine, and it didn't do anything for me, and I thought, this is really boring, okay? And then I did mushrooms, and I thought, well, this is something I'll try once every 10 years, okay? And then that was about it. And so it's always been marijuana. I've never been a drinker either.
A veteran that was killed near Togus, I think, was being treated in the same manner as my husband at the VA. Right. And I started following people that are doing investigations on why he was shot and killed. And he was using marijuana. A lot of people didn't know about it, but a few of his friends did, and he was using it medically, and he was seeking out a medical marijuana doctor's authorization. And I know that for a fact.
So I had my own medical conditions. I was very sick for a long time as a child. I received a lot of allopathic care. Didn't really help me. And then around 17 or 18, I started to take things into my own hand. Marijuana was a big component of that. I've seen it as a teacher, especially at that time. It showed me things that I was missing otherwise. And out of all the healing arts that I've studied, Reiki and hypnotherapy, osteopathy, naturopathy, the simple lessons that one can learn from marijuana, direct experience with altered states of consciousness, those are very valuable. I think that consciousness shift has allowed me to see outside of the box and to be less susceptible to the indoctrination and post-traumatic stress, if you will, of medical training.
I went to a medical rehabilitation place for several years, and the doctor was well aware that I used marijuana with a grower that was working with me on the medical side of it. She was well aware of that for many years. Their policy, I think it was 4 years ago, changed so that if you did be positive for marijuana, that you'd lose whatever prescriptions that you were taking at that point. Now, for me, you're talking about Neurontin. You can't just stop taking Neurontin. You can't just stop taking Tramadol. It's bad, you know. Shocky feelings, your body hurts, sweats, lack of sleep, you name it, you know. So it was pretty scary to think that something that I was using as a medicine could actually affect my life in such a negative way, as such to actually almost threaten my life, because you take that stuff away and I'm going to go through hardcore withdrawals, and it could be a heart attack or whatever.
When I was online posting pictures of myself with cannabis, probably not the smartest thing, but I had 2 DEA members come to my house because of that, and they showed up with paperwork in their hand and said they had to come in, and I completely forgot all of my rights. I forgot everything. I forgot that it was decriminalized in Maine, and I forgot that you could have an ounce and under, and I forgot all of that, or 2 ounce, I don't know. I forgot everything, though, when they showed up and had their papers. I thought they were warrants.
This is the American witch hunt. We're over our homophobia, we're over our racism, but we are not over this institutionalized prejudice and hate. And we have medical patients, and I am one. I have prostate cancer. I am also a patient. And there's a story to tell there too. But the main point is we need a new narrative. We need a new story.
I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Marijuana Commission that Richard Nixon reported. And they came back and said it shouldn't be legalized, but they had a hard time figuring out why. You know, most of us, when you do a problem, you start over here and then you have the equal sign and you come up with the answer. Sometimes, though, people start with the answer and then they have to construct the equation that got them to that answer. So it was foreordained that they were going to come up with an equation with an answer that said marijuana should stay illegal. They had, go read the report, they had a hell of a time coming up with a reason. And the reason they came up with was that if people were allowed to smoke marijuana, they wouldn't be as active economically and it would be bad for the gross domestic product.
The federal government currently defines marijuana as a Schedule I substance in the Controlled Substance Act, which means it has no medical value and research is very limited or not available. This has been petitioned to change since the early 70s by NORML. There's a huge body of evidence that supports marijuana has medicinal qualities. Like many things, there's a big gap between the truth and FDA regulations. This is very common. We're seeing it more and more. Media is beginning to cover it more, to the point where the FDA no longer works under scientific guidelines. It works more under economic and financial guidelines. So when you look at the FDA, you see that most of their board members and directors end up becoming CEOs of pharmaceutical companies and so forth, back and forth. It's plain and simple, it's a very corrupt system. They have the best interests of the big business in mind and not of natural products. Natural products can't be patented. Any substance that you find in biological nature is something that anyone could produce and sell for inexpensive or grow their own. So of course, pharmaceutical industry is very concerned with patenting non-biological molecules and discovering their medical uses and then selling them and directing them that way. The FDA is a huge part of that process and assists them in doing so. So for example, there's 2 synthetic cannabinoids that have been approved by the FDA. One of them is plain old synthetic THC, the same THC that's found in the marijuana plant. So marijuana has no medicinal value according to the Controlled Substance Act, but its major active component has already been approved by the FDA as a pharmaceutical. The hypocrisy is so blatant, and it's nice that this is actually being covered and revealed. It doesn't just apply to marijuana. It applies to natural substances across the board. The FDA is very biased in this manner.
The legislature is a slow-moving creature. I've only been up there for half a session now, but I tell you, it moves at a turtle's rate in recognizing change in our communities. So it's important that we have true voices, a collective voice, and a community dialogue about what you want to see in the future as we establish drug control policy.
It is time for a responsible, thorough, and public debate based on science, evidence-based practice, and common sense. I want to make sure that with our limited resources, that we actually fight crime that hurts people, that we actually help reduce our addiction rate. We should be a leader, a model state. We were just listed as the #1 state in the country for painkiller addiction. What we are doing is not working.
I believe, like many others, that just like alcohol prohibition didn't work and created many unseen consequences, so does prohibition of marijuana.
When passed across America, bills such as LD 1453 will reduce the harms of prohibition as imposed on our society. It will allow police to return to tracking down violent criminals. It will save us billions of tax dollars while creating an additional revenue of billions more. And it will reduce the number of people using these drugs, especially among our young.
What we found is that filling our courts, police cruisers, jails, and prisons with nonviolent drug offenders has done nothing to reduce drug use, dependence, or availability.
But here is the ultimate irony to me. The ultimate irony is that more Maine 11th graders regularly smoke marijuana than they smoke tobacco. 27% to 21%. More Maine kids are smoking marijuana than they are tobacco. I felt that anecdotally in Richmond, and it's true statewide, apparently. So these implications are impossible to overstate in my view. Among Maine youth, despite decades of the harsh tactics of the war on drugs, despite decades of evil effects of ceding the distribution and sale of marijuana to organized crime, kids are still smoking more marijuana than they are cigarettes.
We're here to say that it's long past time for the legislature to recognize a change that in this state and this country has already happened. Most Mainers, like most people in the United States, have enjoyed marijuana at some point in their lives, and I venture to guess that more than a few members of this committee have indulged a few times.
Currently, laws intentionally steer Americans towards the use of alcohol, when many of these citizens would prefer to use a far less dangerous substance, marijuana. In 2004, investigators from the U.S. Center of Disease Control wrote in the Journal of the American Medical Association that alcohol consumption is the third leading cause of death in America, trailing only tobacco smoking and poor diet. By contrast, following a series of evidentiary hearings in 1988, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's administrative law judge concluded, and I quote, "In strict medical terms, marijuana is far safer than many of the foods we commonly consume. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man," end quote.
I have an 18-month-old baby with a brain tumor that I want to treat with medical marijuana. It's a brain tumor that's in a location that isn't conducive to surgery. There's no chemotherapy or radiation for this baby at this time. It's a type of tumor called a glioma, which has been shown in many studies to respond wonderfully to cannabinoids quickly. And this is also a type of tumor that can grow quickly in children. So 4 weeks ago now, we sent in their application and their certification forms. The state has a process. It's in the law that anyone under the age of 18, their certification has to be reviewed by a pediatrician and maybe also a psychiatrist before approval, which is fine if it actually would happen. But here we are 4 weeks later. The mom has called DHHS every other day for the last 2 weeks, and there's still no card. There's still no certification. There's still no medicine for this baby that really needs it sooner rather than later. So there's a few situations like that where the inefficiency at the state level in terms of registration are potentially seriously harmful or maybe even fatal to patients. It can make a really big difference in this case and a few others that I have.
I piece all the dots together. It comes down to federal versus state law. And because he is a disabled veteran going to a federal entity, he's basically been targeted, discriminated against, labeled a marijuana abuser in his medical record at the VA, regardless of their knowledge of his medical use of marijuana, under the supervision of a doctor. And so far, they've done absolutely nothing but discourage him from even getting any medical treatment at the VA whatsoever. He needs MS treatment, and we are actually seeing a doctor this month to get him MS treatment outside the VA. That's going to cost us a lot of money that he's entitled to, but they're claiming that his MS isn't active. Meaning, if you've got physical symptoms, I mean, there's no denying that, but they're not even acknowledging that. They'll say, oh, we don't know why he walks that way, or he's got a funny gait about him.
And I have had doctors refuse to see me as a result of my medical marijuana.
And I didn't like the fact that the side effects of the antidepressants were also unpleasant in other ways, you know. I used to complain about him, and he told me that he found out when I smoked marijuana, he said that he would not prescribe me these drugs anymore if I was on marijuana, because marijuana is a depressant. I told him that I had to disagree with that concept because, frankly, when I smoke marijuana, I feel better, you know. He told me it made me dependent on that, and if I didn't have it, then I would be depressed. So I needed the depressants and antidepressants and had to get off the marijuana. And I argued with him. He told me he wouldn't prescribe the drugs anymore, and I said, well, I've been complaining about them. I don't want them, so okay. And we've not seen each other since.
When you got alcohol and cigarettes out there legal, and they're going to kill you sooner or later.
There's a directive right now, a VA directive, Directive 038, I believe, which says the Veterans Administration is not going to use medical marijuana against patients where it's legal in their state, as long as they're using it under the supervision of a doctor. And that directive, the original directive came out in 2009. That's another thing I was fighting with the VA. There's this directive saying you're not going to use medical marijuana against my husband, but they are.
There's also a synthetic cannabinoid called nabilone, which has been approved since the 80s as a anti-nausea drug that can also be used for pain off-label. There's more synthetic cannabinoids coming down the pipeline. This is actually a huge area of research in the pharmaceutical world, because since the discovery of the endocannabinoid system, there's been this whole other physiologic system that can be targets for pharmaceuticals. So they've been actually spending a lot of money and doing a lot of research on synthetic cannabinoids. And we're going to see these coming forward in more anti-nausea drugs, chemotherapy drugs due to their anti-tumor properties, metabolic syndrome drugs and obesity drugs. There was one that was approved in Europe and in phase 3 trials in the US that blocked the cannabinoid system, and then it got pulled from the market because it was causing suicide and tumor growth and things like that. It's not a good system to block. It's a very healthy system to have functioning. So yeah, that's why the federal government is in the middle of this blatant hypocrisy with no medical value, yet it's currently approving and supporting research on substances that are found in marijuana.
And this is supposed to be about people that are sick, that need their medication, and people in Maine, I mean, people everywhere, they don't have money to just cough up $100 and then another extra $300 to make somebody their caregiver. And then dispensaries get a break of only, they're going to have to pay $30 for their patients, and caregivers that are small, they're going to have to pay $300. That's absolutely insane, you know. It's supposed to be all about patients, not about money.
Still needs to be altered. There's going to be people that come in with great ideas for the medical marijuana program, and I think it needs to be open to change.
There's a whole change happening in Maine, and I think that medical marijuana is in the forefront of all that change.
So one of the biggest problems in working with the state is that they're overwhelmed, just like everyone else in this field is. There's so few doctors doing these recommendations that any doctor who decides to do one for one patient all of a sudden gets swamped by phone calls from other patients who hear about it. Same thing at the state. They have 2 or 3 staff members that are working on the medical marijuana program over at DHHS, and they just can't keep up with the demand. We're faxing them certifications, patients are sending in applications, there's phone calls with questions, and they just don't have the staffing to respond.
I don't know if my recent registration under protest and duress will affect my VA compensation or not. I certainly hope not, since I didn't want to do it in the first place, and it's not the law that was passed by the people, and my rights are being violated, but under threat of losing my property and losing the property of patients, I had to sign up.
In their infinite knowledge and wisdom, they feel that they know better, know more about me and my condition medically than my doctor ever will, and they're asserting themselves in between me and my doctor and telling us what I can do and how much I can have, and that's wrong. They don't have the right to tell me how much I have to use to do the job. I don't tell them how much alcohol they have to drink before they get shit-faced drunk.
I don't know if you realize how many kids we have in this state that are messed up on pharmaceuticals and the amount of pharmaceuticals that have been rifled into this state. But I think there's a very, very large place for medical marijuana in helping a lot of kids and a lot of people, whether they be AIDS patients, cancer patients, addicts, what have you.
There's so much ignorance in this area that I feel like because I've read a lot and studied, and now I have clinical experience with medical marijuana, puts me in a position to help the movement continue on forward. I've participated in educating conventional doctors. I send copies of my notes to other providers and encourage them to feel comfortable doing this for their own patients with little success. Most of them, when they realize there's somebody out there who's doing this comfortable enough to talk about it or teach it, they would rather just send me their patients instead of learning about it and doing it themselves. Again, because I think a lot of doctors are thinking inside of their box and their scope of practice, and they don't want to go outside of their comfort zone. So it hasn't really worked. I haven't seen much progress in getting conventional doctors to start doing this. My hope is that new doctors coming out of residency and coming out of medical school will be more open-minded to this, because the research is more current, it's in the news now, younger minds might be more open.
So the whole drug thing is based upon such hypocrisy. Back in the year 2000, I asked my good friend Noam Chomsky, why was marijuana illegal and tobacco legal? And boy, he went into about an 8-minute answer. And he looked at it from a socio and a political way. And that's the way I look at it too, that it's amazing the number of people that alcohol and tobacco kill every year. And yet marijuana is singled out.
Thank you.